Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Double Waves Yellows podcast. This week we are talking about the Belgian Grand Prix review. Lots of stuff that has gone on the support series. Not so much F1, but obviously a lot of to talk about nevertheless. And as always, I am joined by Hodders and Tyson. Hello to you both.
Hey up.
Hello.
Um, Hodders, an eventful weekend, mostly for the wrong reasons, unfortunately.
Yes, and all of that generally due to Mother Nature and all the elements that she provides.
Absolutely, and we will discuss more of that shortly. But we've had support races again this weekend. Holders will talk us through the W Series shortly. However, first up, Tyson and Formula 3.
All right, so this weekend Formula 3 visited Spa-Francorchamps, and as we know, there was only one thing on the weather's mind: rain. A wet qualifying session preceded three wet races, and it looked like we were set up for a washout, but fortunately we were able to get the cars on track and get some racing in. So, as always, F3 follows the established 2021 qualifying format. I'm sure people know how it works by now. Jack Doohan claimed pole position in qualifying, which placed him at the front for Sunday's feature race. A remaining top 12 line up behind him in reverse qualifying order. Lorenzo Colombo finished 12th, which set him as the pole sitter for race one. But the big surprise for qualifying was championship leader Dennis Hauger only able to qualify 14th. He had a good lead coming into this round of races, but certainly not making it easy for himself. So, Saturday morning, race one, very similar situation to Formula One, where the start procedure was suspended after three formation laps. But however, the rain did eventually let up, and after an hour, we got underway behind the safety car. Treacherous conditions meant it was very much a race of holding position. The wall of spray kicking up behind the cars decreased visibility for the drivers following and made them much more cautious. So we didn't get as much on-track action as we're used to seeing, and it threw up a very interesting set of results. None of the main championship contenders really scoring well. Lorenzo Colombo led the whole race pretty much uncontested. He took his maiden win after being denied a penalty last time out in Hungary, finished 13 seconds ahead of Jack Crawford in second, and they were joined on the podium by Roman Stanek. None of them really in the championship hunt, but they all picked up some valuable points to move them up some places in the Drivers' Championship. But also of note was a great battle for fourth place near the end of the race. A very bold move by Kyle Collett to try and move to the head of the multiple car train. Did a really good job to hold on to it, but unfortunately it was clear he'd made the overtake off track on both sides, subsequently penalised, dropping him down to ninth. Going into race two, Jack Doohan's 12th in the first sprint race put him on pole position for race two, and he took full advantage, converted that into the win, closed the gap on championship leader and main rival Dennis Hauger, who was really struggling down in the middle of the pack. He was fortunate to take advantage of a safety car restart after Matteo Nannini spun in front of the pit lane, managed to improve his position from 14th to finish 9th. David Schumacher, Logan Sargent, they rounded out the podium again, usually in championship contention, but picking up some nice points for themselves. The race itself ended behind the safety car after an incident at Eau Rouge Radion involving Amari Cordial and Callum Williams. Just one of many across this weekend, but we'll be talking about those more in depth later in the podcast. Race 3, again, a rolling start behind the safety car due to the wet conditions, and once again, Doohan converted the pole position into a win, making the most of his opportunity. Wasn't an easy one though. Victor Martin in second place for hard really pushed him to the limit and overtook him for the lead at one point on lap 5, but had to give the position back the next lap as it appeared he had all four wheels off when he made the move. Victor Martin and Alex Molia rounded out the podium positions, and Hauger was once again left playing damage limitation. Managed to claw his way up to 8th and score a few points, but overall, 44 points for Doohan across the weekend versus Hauger's 6 has really closed the gap at the top of the championship. What was looking like a dominant win for Hauger at the end of Hungary, suddenly Doohan is right back in the running. Other drivers of note across the weekend: Frederick Vesti, Clement Novalak, Kyle Collett, they all had a very consistent weekend, grabbed themselves a nice haul of points over the three races. The younger brother of Charles Leclerc, Arthur Leclerc, also picked up a couple of points for himself with two P10 finishes. Ollie Caldwell, unfortunately, just had a very, very bad weekend. Not scored any points, dropped from 3rd to 7th in the championship, which may well be the end of his campaign. And despite not scoring any points, it has to be mentioned, massive props to Juan Manuel Correa for coming back and racing a Spa once again after the Formula 2 incident he was involved in 2 years ago, where we unfortunately lost Anton Hubert and left Correa in a coma, requiring 26 surgeries for injuries to his spine and legs. In his own words, it's going to be an opportunity for me to face my fears and show everyone that I can drive there without any issues and hopefully have some good races. Really good to see him back on track and his recovery across this season. So in the Drivers' Championship, Dennis Hauger, very much a damage control weekend for him, but he still leads the championship with 158 points. Jack Doohan's double podium, it has brought him right back into the championship hunt, narrowing the gap down to 25, 133 points. Freddie Bestie, good finishes, scored some nice points, moves him up to 3rd with 101 points. Victor Martin, 2nd place in the feature race, and solid sprint finishes, moves him up into 4th with 96 points. Alex Mollier, Clement Novelak, they also had consistent weekends, which bring them into 5th and 6th, respectively. Tied on 92 points, but Smolier's 2 wins earlier in the season, giving him the advantage, nudging him ahead. And Ollie Caldwell's disastrous weekend keeps him on 86 points, dropping him down into 7th. In the team's championship, the Prema drivers struggled. They didn't pick up a lot of points, only able to extend their lead to 290, whereas Trident brought in a massive haul of points from podiums and solid points finishes over the weekend. They're now hot on Prema's heels with 274 points. ART remained in 3rd, also scoring some nice points across the weekend to bring them up to 202 points. So, with 2 rounds, 6 races to go, and we've suddenly got a potential challenger for Dennis Hauger's championship in the form of Jack Doohan, and only a difference of 25 points, which is literally 1 feature race win. Just behind them, we've got a very close battle for 3rd, with 15 points separating 3rd through to 7th. Anybody could take that one. And we don't have to wait long for the next round, as next week Formula 3 comes to Zandvoort in the Netherlands. But before we go there, we also have some W Series action in Belgium this week, and I'm going to throw over to Hodders to give us the rundown on that.
Thanks, Tyson, and safe to say that the W Series race was just as eventful as Formula 3. Caitlin Wood making her 2nd appearance as a reserve driver, though we actually had 2 reserve drivers at the weekend, with the unfortunate positive COVID result on the Friday of Ira Sidakova, a real blow for her, causing her self-isolate. But the good news I can announce is it has been confirmed today that having tested negative during the last couple of days, Ira Sidakova will be racing at Zandvoort this weekend. So Goja Adest took her place in the academy side, also becoming the first reserve driver to race for 2 different teams, having filled the Puma seat of Tamsin Pepper, who is still unable to race due to South African COVID restrictions. Practice was relatively uneventful, if wet, but when it came to qualifying, that's where the major incident happened. Around 6 minutes or so into qualifying, around the 3rd lap, what we thought was originally a 2-car incident had actually turned into a 6-car incident. Isla Argren and Beitskis coming off the worst, both ending up in hospital, but both discharged. But it did cause one of the first red flags in the W Series this season, pausing the session for over 30 minutes. It did resume in the end once everything was cleared. Other drivers were able to race later on, and it was pole position once again for Jamie Chadwick. So in the race in the end, the other 4 drivers involved who didn't go to hospital were able to race using their times they'd already set, but it did take them towards the back of the grid. And naturally, for the first 10 minutes or so, the race began under the safety car due to the wet conditions and for safety reasons. Jamie Chadwick keeping the lead, but not all the way, as with just 4 minutes to go, enter Emma Kimmelainen, overtaking wonderfully, keeping the lead for the end, and by the end, actually winning by well over 7 seconds. In terms of other positions, Marta Garcia, a very respectable 3rd place, and Caitlin Wood 5th, topping off a very healthy weekend for the Puma side, who haven't performed very well so far. Alice Powell, still in the title race, finishing 4th. Caitlin Wood's 5th, earning her first championship points. Jess Hawkins, also notably 6th place, to make it 2-point scoring races in a row. Fabian Volven, despite finishing towards the back of the grid in terms of those who were in the crash, still managed to parlay that up into 7th. Maria Marti still getting points for the Academy, and also points for Mika Kiyama and Abby Eaton In terms of those who were involved in other incidents, Vicky Perea was in 12th. Saber Cook still the only driver yet to score, but there's still 3 races left. In terms of the championship standings, Emma Kimalainen's victory propelling her from being into a very firm 3rd place. Jamie Chadwick still leads on 91 points, 7 points ahead of Alice Powell. Emma Kimalainen 24 points behind, but still very much in contention with 3 races to go. The race for 3rd is, or rather the race for 4th now, is still a 4-driver race between Nerea Marti, Fabian Volven with the very impressive 7th place, Sarah Moore, whose title race is near as over following 2 sub-top 10 finishes, and Irisa Dikova, despite not racing, is still very firmly in 7th. And then there's also numerous races for the likes of 8th place and 10th place as well. And as I said, every driver who's participated so far, except Saber Cook, has a point. And it'll be very interesting to see what will become at Zandvoort. We'll wait to see whether Ayla Argren and Bijtske will have medical clearance. I'd hope so, as it's Bijtske home race. And also worth noting in the news recently that the podium trophies will be made from recycled materials.
Nice little nugget of information to finish on there. Thank you very much, guys. So, yes, a very eventful support series event on the Friday, the Saturday, and the Sunday morning. Unfortunately, I can't say the same for the main event, the Formula 1 race. So, Max Verstappen wins a 2-lap Belgian Grand Prix. George Russell gets his first career podium, finishing in 2nd, and Hamilton in 3rd. The race was severely delayed by 25 minutes and then eventually shortened due to poor weather conditions. Start was delayed by 25 minutes, and then we had an additional delay of nearly 3 hours. Eventually, the race was started behind the safety car, but abandoned after just 2 laps. So Hodders and I have picked, as usual, 3 drivers to focus on. We don't really have much to report on, but we'll obviously give it our best shot. So for starters, I went with Lando Norris, his 50th Grand Prix. He was on course for a spectacular qualifying result. He was fastest in qualifying 1, fastest in qualifying 2. We thought he could have been one of the main contenders for pole position. However, a huge crash in Radion at the start of qualifying 3 brought out the red flags. Ended up qualifying 10th. However, needed the gearbox change, so started in 15th. However, due to circumstances, he ended up finishing the race in 14th. One of the first people on the scene of Norris's crash was one of Hodder's choices.
Yes, my first choice was Sebastian Vettel. He had a very good qualifying session, 7th in Q1, 6th in Q2, and improved yet further in 5th place in Q3, 1 second and change behind Max Verstappen, and due to the rather curtailed race, if you can call it that, finishing in a very respectable 5th, making up for the heartbreak in Hungary.
Indeed, and obviously we'll cover Vettel's involvement a little bit later on. Second of the drivers I was keeping an eye on was the Iceman, who would have been at home really in those sorts of conditions. Kimi Raikkonen unfortunately qualified 19th. However, he had to start from the pit lane after a rear wing change overnight. Ended up finishing in 18th. Hodders, who is your next choice?
Choice is pretty much mine, and I think everyone on the podcast sort of favourite rookie at the moment, that is the Japanese driver Yuki Tsunoda. A slightly less substantive performance than we've seen of late, but he is a rookie and he is learning. 17th in Q1, he was 6/10 adrift from the Q2 times, and as a result of other circumstances, started 16th and finished in 15th place. Again, he is learning, he is a rookie. And although his drive for next year hasn't yet been confirmed, it's looking very likely it'll be announced at or prior to Monza.
Good stuff. And lastly, my third driver, George Russell, also his 50th Grand Prix weekend. Qualified 5th in Q1. We thought that might have been a flash in the pan, but no. 8th in qualifying 2, and then to our utter astonishment, 2nd in qualifying 3. He was fastest when the checkered flag was flying. We thought surely not. Unfortunately, Max Verstappen just beating him by 0.3 of a second. However, due to the unusual circumstances, George Russell ended up finishing where he started, finishing 2nd, and scoring his first ever podium, which was great to see. And even the hordes of Dutch fans were cheering from the stands during the podium ceremony as well. And Hodders, lastly, your third choice.
Well, my third choice was a surname that's already been mentioned on this podcast, named after Schumacher. In this case, it's Mick Schumacher, son of Michael, of course. Finished 18th in Q1, but he was a clear second faster than his teammate Nikita Mazepin. Started 17th, wearing a helmet of a similar design to when Michael Schumacher made his debut at Spa as well, finishing 16th in the end.
Indeed, thanks very much. Tyson, it's of the 6 drivers there, it's kind of hard really to put some sort of real notes in, given it's obviously it's going to be a discussion point later, but the curtailed race that we had.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult to find things to say this week, but we did get some good action in the qualifying races. As you say, Russell, if anyone were to have put a bet on at the start of the season that Williams was going to be on the front row, I wouldn't have believed it. And that really was great to see.
Yeah, and of course, we were chatting pre-race about this as well, Tyson. We thought, Russell's got a chance of a good haul of points, but a podium, nah.
No. And if there was one feel-good takeaway from the weekend, that was definitely it for me.
Absolutely. Right, let's move on to our winners and spinners. And there certainly were a lot of physical spinners, if you like, during the weekend. But in terms of who had a weekend to remember and who had a race or a weekend they'd rather forget, for me, and actually for all of us, we picked out 2 drivers who were worthy of the winners of the weekend and who were the spinners. For me, George Russell, Mr. Saturday, his qualifying performance that he has been banging out for the last 2 years, finally pay off in style. Yes, it was only half points that he got, but still, second is second, his highest result ever. First ever podium. Hodders, it was a great performance across the weekend for George.
It really is. We've been saying all season he's been Mr. Saturday, but across the whole weekend, he did not put a foot or wheel wrong. And we sing his praises, we quite rightly do. He has a very bright future ahead of him.
Mm-hmm. And Tyson, we are expecting some news to be announced in the next couple of weeks on George's future. I think we all pretty much know where he's going, but obviously nothing confirmed as yet.
Yep, and it's something we're all looking forward to. I really hope he gets the opportunity.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Tyson, the other driver that we thought was our collective winner of the weekend.
Yeah, I think I said this on the Saturday instantly after the Norris incident. Sebastian Vettel, the first one on the scene, went over to check on Lando Norris, gave him the thumbs up. That was just such a classy move on his part. So, yeah, there was no doubt I was giving him the winner after that.
Absolutely, and obviously it's another part that we will discuss shortly. Vettel was very clearly unhappy with race control that the session was not red flagged before the accident. Hodders.
Yeah, exactly. He was livid. He was vocal, and quite rightly so. I believe he's also a member of the GPDA that also speaks with the administrators as well. He was incredibly unhappy. He said this. He basically said, "Red flag this. This is not safe," and he was vocal and quite rightly about it.
Yeah, the GPDA, the Grand Prix Drivers Association, the senior drivers sort of have a voice with Formula One in terms of safety. But Tyson, ironically enough, the driver who was involved in your winner of the weekend was your spinner of the weekend.
Yeah, I feel quite bad about giving this to Norris, but he really was on it in qualifying. Just one unfortunate incident took him out, and what could have been if he'd got that lap in?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say he definitely would have been in the points. And it was a bit of a nasty one. He did require a bit of a hospital checkup and clearance from the doctors to race.
He did. There was no major prominent result, but he was holding his arm. He must have had quite a bit of impact on that one. At least he was medically cleared to race, but again, we don't like to see it.
No, absolutely not. And lastly, my spinner of the weekend, Sergio Perez, spinning off at the Lecombe chicane on his installation lap on the lap to the grid. He was permitted to start by the stewards, but ended up obviously finishing plumb last. He qualified seventh, so you've got to argue he would have been in for a fairly sizable haul of points. Hodders, in a championship that is this close, that is a mistake that wasn't needed.
Yeah, with everything so delicately poised, particularly for the Constructors' Championships as well, that was a right clanger.
Yeah, but Tyson also, that was a lap on the way to the grid. It's not really one where the drivers are pushing to get the tyres warmed up. So, and it's a very slow corner that chicane, so that must have set alarm bells ringing race control when you saw, if you can go off there on the way to the grid, this is not right.
Yeah, it was a really strange one, and it's something I have alluded to before, but is the curse of the second Red Bull driver getting to Perez? Because he's making all these little mistakes that we didn't really see last year.
No, it's a very, very good point. We didn't really see. We saw a sort of solid season from Checo. Right, on to our talking points. Now we've got. I will just say, just for the listeners, we sort of have in our little notes that we prepare to bring this to you. So talking points, no more than 15 minutes. I'm sorry, that's not happening today because
broken.
Absolutely. So on Friday and Saturday, obviously a major talking point was obviously in regards to the incidents at the Eau Rouge and Radion, thinking that was going to be the main talking point. Obviously, we will have another one coming up in a short while, but quite clearly a lot of incidents, not just this weekend, but this year, and obviously going back to the Antoine Hubert incident 2 years ago. Eau Rouge and Radion is causing a number of incidents. We saw about a month ago, Jack Aitken crash in a 24-hour Spa in the dry. He's gone off at the top of the hill. Unfortunately, his car's ended up smack bang in the middle of the road where someone else has piled into him. Jack Aitken had, I think, some very serious injuries, required hospital treatment. I think he's all right now, thank goodness. We then obviously had the W Series accident, and this was in qualifying, which was bizarre. And I was watching the coverage, and just all of a sudden at the top of the shot, you just saw these two cars go off at the top of the hill. And normally think, okay, let's see what's going on, but the TV's directors quickly cut away, so clearly we've had something major happen there. 6 drivers off, 4 of whom have managed to get back to, have been taken back to the pits, and they're okay. 2 obviously off to hospital. 1 was not medically clear for the race. We then had an incident in race 2 in Formula 3. Again, cars being pushed back onto the racing line. Then the Norris crash in qualifying 3. So I think there's a very clear question that needs to be asked here, and we are going to discuss it. And Hodders, I will come to you first. Eau Rouge / Radion, does it need changing?
Just based on the incident we had this weekend this year, I feel like something has got to give. I mean, nobody wants any part of any circuit to be seen as a massive danger to safety. Just from the fact that, as you mentioned, Jack Aitken crashed and was there in the dry. If you're having incidents like that in the dry, then something is very clearly wrong with that stretch of the circuit. So I think changes do need to happen purely, indeed, almost certainly for driver safety.
Mm-hmm. And Tyson, obviously, we're no circuit designers, but I think the basics that we've talked about over the weekend, there's got to be 2 key elements here. I think there needs to be the gravel traps to act as a deterrent to drivers not to just absolutely hammer this flat out, because they're using obviously the runoff area, but also the runoff area itself at the top of the hill on the left hand side. At the moment, you've just basically got a mound of grass. That needs to be extended, because otherwise we are going to have a major incident again.
Yeah, I think the gravel traps would work as a good deterrent because it is such a good corner, but there is absolutely no margin for error when you take it. And these cars, they can go through it flat out now. And you pretty much have to get every 10th of a second. And you get it wrong, you go into the barrier, you just get spat back out onto the track. And that's a blind crest at the top of the hill. You don't know what you're going to see when you come over it.
Mm-hmm. And I think in particular this was a comment made elsewhere. I think in particular it's dangerous with the Formula 1 cars because see, they are much faster, they are much heavier, the tyres they've got. If the F1 cars get it wrong in Eau Rouge, the potential for a nasty backlash, for want of a better term, down the field is quite bad. But I think there's also the counter argument for gravel traps. We've seen in 98 and 99 F1 qualifying, Jacques Villeneuve had two huge accidents, and because it's a gravel trap, it basically just catches this car and starts flipping it over. So I think there needs to obviously be the right measure, but I think having gravel traps will deter the drivers from just going into that corner recklessly.
Yeah, it is a really tricky one. And I will say, I think they were fortunate in the Formula 3 race because that was behind the safety car, but how much slower the cars are, they were able to avoid a lot of the incident.
Mm-hmm. Hodders, your thoughts?
Just based on the runoffs and the incident we've had this weekend, those demonstrate quite clearly that something's got to give. See also the W Series pile-up.
Yeah. Okay, which obviously we've talked about. Right. So now on to the race, and we've got a lot of questions there that we are going to discuss, but just to give an idea of how things planned out. So I'm going to run through all the race timelines. These are all obviously the messages that were given by race control, so we get an understanding of what happened. So this is sort of local time, local Belgian time. So the race should have started at 1500 hours. So at 1450, 10 minutes before we get the message, formation lap will start behind the safety car, and this is something that we all expected to happen. At 14:58, there is a delayed start until 15:10. Now, because it's a delayed start, the rules mean that the race resistance is reduced by 1 lap. So at this point, we're down to 43 laps. At 1500, the 3-hour countdown starts now. Just to indicate what that means is normally in F1 race, it's a maximum of 2 hours of racing time. However, if there are any red flags in there, the 2-hour time limit is extended up to a maximum of 3 hours. It used to be 4 hours, it's now 3 hours. But that 3 hours starts counting down the scheduled start time of the race. Okay, so at this point, we're now expecting basically 1800 hours will be the end of the race. Okay. At 15:04, we get another delayed start until 15:15. The race distance is now reduced to 42 laps. Again, at 15:07, delayed start, 15:20, down to 41 laps. And again, 15:14, delayed until 15:25, races reduced to 40 laps. So within 14 minutes, we've had 4 laps taken off the race distance with no racing. And quite clearly, this rain is really set in. Finally, at 15:25, the formation laps do begin behind the safety car. However, at 15:30, after just 2 formation laps, the red flag is shown and the start procedure is suspended. Because we've had 1 additional lap behind the safety car, that lap is taken off the races, and so we're down to 39 laps. At which point, basically, all of us are just sitting home, waiting, making observations on what we are seeing, etc. At 1700, the stewards, using a force majeure rule within the International Sporting Code, decide they want to give this race every opportunity to happen, so they pause the countdown clock at 1 hour. Okay, we then get a little bit later, 1806, the race will resume at 1817. Okay, now critically, if the 3-hour clock had just been left to count down, this would not have happened. The race would have been long over. 1817, the race resumes and the 1-hour countdown resumes. However, halfway around lap 3, the red flags are thrown again. Obviously, at this point, we essentially do have a race. We are on lap 3 of the race. And then at 1844, we get the final message from race control, which is the race will not resume. And because 2 laps have been completed, half points are rewarded and the results are taken from 2 laps back, so the end of lap 1. So essentially the shortest ever race on record at I think just about 3.5 minutes and just short of 7 kilometres. So yeah, we've got a few questions to discuss, and I think the first one, Hodders, I'll come to you. Was this a race?
If it is a race, I think it does very much become a very tenuous definition as whether it was a race or not. I mean, considering it was essentially a 44-lap race and they only allowed for 2, that does seem far too small. Now, I've seen races in the past, this is going back in things like the Clio Cup and other sorts of things, where they've had an incident and it stopped after 2 laps, but that was an 8 or 10 lap race. That's still, of course, the race distance. That's acceptable. But essentially, you could almost say it was a 2-lap quote-unquote glorified procession behind the safety car. Is that a race in the general definition? I would say it wasn't.
No, it's a tricky one, but Hodders, as far as the Formula One sporting regulations go, you've got 2 laps in the bag.
It is. It's a race under the F1 definition. Under the legal definition, it is, but from a fan's point of view, it's tentative as whether it was or not. But I acknowledge that legally speaking, it is.
Yeah, and Tyson, obviously, we were chatting about it on Sunday, and it's one where we were really uncomfortable having to see the fact that yes, it was likely going to be the likely strategy was going to be from race control, get the cars out there, do 2 laps, put something on the board, and then just call a halt to there.
Yeah, I think I'm 100% with Hodders on that one. It was a air quotes race, more of a procession, but by the International Sporting Code, they did get the 2 laps in that are required, and so the points were handed out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So moving on to the next question, and Tyson, I will come to you first on this. Could the FIA have done anything differently?
It's a tricky one because you can tell they gave that race every chance of happening. They did believe there would be a window where they could get some racing in. Unfortunately, that window never materialized. You can argue, they've got this 3-hour rule in. They found a way to circumvent that. I don't think the TV networks are going to be very thrilled about that, but yeah, it's a tricky one for me. I wouldn't have wanted to be in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think from what we've learnt since Sunday from various publications and from the FIA, I think when that race was resumed, when the notice went out at 18:06, race will resume. I think it's because they could see actually that it was starting to clear, but unfortunately, by the time the race resumed at 18:17. Not only had that window just completely gone, but also it was just the spray coming up from the cars. Yeah, nothing's really going to happen there. Hodders, the FIA and in particular the race director Michael Massey, they have come in for a lot of criticism. But let's be very clear here: if anything happens to a driver, a fan, a marshal, the responsibility is on Mr. Massey.
Absolutely. If anything happens, it's on him. And he's coming for a lot of flack for all that's gone on. But again, I do have to empathise for the man. He has a very great responsibility on his shoulders. He tried to get something on under the sporting regulations. While we may not like it as a race, he was following protocol. And this has never happened before.
Exactly, and you're talking nearly 1,050 races in the history of Formula One. This has never happened before, and it's been announced basically the F1 Commission will meet in October. They will discuss potential rule changes for next season, but these rule changes only come about when you get these very extreme circumstances. And I think also one thing that should be addressed is there's been a lot of speculation that basically the FIA basically put that race, inverted commas, on for commercial reasons. Now, I'll be very blunt here. There is no way any sort of financial commercial pressure would have affected the decisions by race control. They can't, because there's just the ramifications if they let the drivers race, and someone goes off, Rouge Radion would have been highly likely, down the Camel Straight, there would have been... It just doesn't bear thinking about what the ramifications could have been.
If I can cut in, I think it was a case of they were damned if they do and damned if they don't, and Michael Massey just chose the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically we were saying when we were watching it, it was going to be one of three outcomes. One, which was never going to happen, is we eventually get to green flag racing. That was obviously never going to happen. Two, which obviously did happen, was we get the 2 laps on the board. 3, no race whatsoever. And yeah, Michael Massey, no one could have blamed him if he basically didn't send the cards out, because we even saw on the 2 laps prior to the final red flag, the safety car was wobbling around on the track. On the formation laps, Max nearly crashed into the safety car. During the red flag, we saw the medical car out there, and that was wobbling all over the place. So if you've got those AMG Mercedes, which have got a considerable, much more ground clearance and bigger tyres, if they're wobbling all over the place, that just shows how bad the conditions really were.
And then, as we saw in the Formula 3 race, the amount of spray that's getting kicked up, you're practically blinding everyone behind you.
Yeah, and this is another aspect that's been raised, and that basically there was hardly any wind, but also you've got a lot of the trees covering the area, so that wind for what's there, it's not going to blow any of the surface water away. So it was never going to happen, I guess, that race. Next question, and Tyson, I'll start with you. I think this is probably going to be a clear one. Do the rules need changing?
They definitely need to have a look at it after this weekend, because it wasn't a great show that they put on. But that's their job now, to look at it and see, right, could we have done anything differently? What measures are we going to put into place so that we don't get another incident like this again?
I think the key word you used there is show. Although primarily Formula 1 is a sport, it is also a show. And the show that was put on for the fans, for the television viewers, it wasn't that great. Well, actually, no, I'll retract that. It wasn't great, full stop. The fact of the matter is, we pretty much had the finishing order confirmed over 24 hours before with the result of qualifying. So that's not great. Hodders, what ultimately should consist of a race?
It's a difficult one, and it's one that we have to approach carefully, because we're not trying to be big-headed and stuff with rules. We're just speaking as fans of varied experience and just common sense more than anything else. Now, I think all three of us and others discussed it on Sunday, didn't we? And we thought the idea of something like a percentage, or 5 laps, or 10%, or whichever is the greater. I think 10% is reasonable. I mean, I'm looking from other sporting perspectives as well. For example, take for example, and I'm going to use an analogy here. Take a limited overs cricket match. Now, say you've got a 2020 match. If you want that to be a result, you've got to get at least 5 overs in. That's 25%. If you're doing a 50-over match, it's got to be at least 10. I watch club cricket during the summer, and that's normally anywhere from 40 to 50 overs. You've got to get 20 overs in to get a result. That's up to 40%. It's a difficult one, but I think there needs to be not so much a lap number as a percentage of the laps, maybe 10% or something to that effect. So I would think, based on the races that we have in the calendar, and we'd round it up, I would say actually round it up, or even down, you'd be looking at least 4 to 7 laps to constitute a race. Now, I know we had 2 separate races at Azerbaijan per se, but that 2-lap sprint was at the end of a race that was towards the end of a race that was red flagged, when we'd had 90% of the race length. So I think there needs to be a percentage rather than a set number of laps, and it needs to be enough to constitute enough to quote-unquote race. And something we all said and agreed is, if you're going to have a lap percentage, that must be the number of laps under green flag conditions, and that's the kicker.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because if this 2-lap rule were to remain in place, potentially we could have a similar scenario at Monaco, where it is the shortest circuit on the calendar. You could literally have 2 laps there. You could effectively have a result on the charts, which would basically be the race was run over 2 miles, and that would just be a farce. So I think a percentage term, you're right. I think 10% sounds about right, because you've got to think, how long could a race potentially last if you're doing it, say, 25%. I think one of our friends mentioned. I don't think that's right. And yeah, green flag conditions at the race, or failing that, at least get the race started under green flag conditions.
Yes.
I think if we'd have had the scenario, and I think this is what happened with Antoine Hubert at the 2019 Belgian Grand Prix, that race was started under green. Not a problem at all. It was a dry day, and unfortunately, the accident happened on lap 2, and the race was immediately red flagged. Now, because of the rules, less than 2 laps completed, it was a non-event, and everyone could, of course, understand why. I think with this, going forward, what we want is, if it's to be a race, and I'm sure there's various dictionary definitions out there, we're not going to go looking now, there needs to be, at the very least, 2 full laps completed under green flag conditions, i.e. no safety car, no virtual safety car, because otherwise, it's not good, this. And last question, Hodders, I will come to you on this one first. Should the fans receive some form of refund or financial reimbursement?
I am of the view that if they had a Sunday ticket or a whole weekend ticket, I think there needs to be at least a partial refund. I think something like that, or at least some sort of alternative, i.e., they would get a discount towards next year or credit towards a future race. Somebody may not be able to make Spa Formula 1 next year, or even some sort of credit towards a future event at that circuit. I think the fans need at least something. I mean, they were sat there for hours on end when it was absolutely bombing it down. I think credit to many for staying. I mean, I saw some leaving, who could blame them, but I think there does need to be some sort of remuneration to the fans, just for their patience more than anything.
Absolutely, and I think the considerable majority, if not all, of the drivers and teams would echo that. Tyson, I'm thinking. I agree. I think there should be a refund, partial or otherwise. But this is really going to hurt the Belgian organisers. When you think a month ago the track was flooded.
Yeah, I do think there needs to be a make good of some form, either in the form of refunds or priority tickets to the next race, because they, as Hodders said, they were sat there for 3 hours, absolutely chucking it down, hoping for a race to start, and they didn't get anything from it.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think at home? Do you agree with us? Do you not agree with us? Let us know. Put your comments down below. We do read them. We do want to know what you're thinking. So let's have a look at the championship battle, because obviously it was a championship race. Championship points were handed out. So Lewis Hamilton sees his gap closed by Max Verstappen's win. However, with half points, Hamilton is now on 202.5 points from Max Verstappen on 199.5 points. So a 3-point gap with about 10 races to go. Lando stays on 113, as does Bottas on 108. Perez also staying put on 104. The big mover, of course, is George Russell. He's up to 15th on 13 points, well clear of his teammate Nicholas Latifi on 7, and of course the rest of the pack behind. In the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes continue to lead on 310.5 points, but of course that lead has been washed away somewhat by Red Bull, winning the Belgian Grand Prix, so 303.5 points, the gap down to 7 points. McLaren on 169 after a good haul of points from Danny Ricciardo. Ferrari on 165.5 points, so the battle for third well and truly on there. And then a battle for fifth, Alpine on 80, AlphaTauri on 72, Aston Martin on 53. Towards the back, Williams well clear in 8th on 20 points from Alfa Romeo on 3 and Haas on 0. I think Williams, it's fair to say they will wrap up that P8 unless we see another weird result. And finally, from us, some breaking news in the last hour. It has been announced that the Alfa Romeo driver Kimi Raikkonen will retire at the end of this season after a career that dates all the way back to 2001. And by the time he finishes this season, he will have done over 350 Grand Prix. Just very quick, guys, we'll just have a look. Hodders Kimi has had a very long established career. I think over 20 wins. He's been the 2007 world champion. He's got a career that he can be proud of.
Absolutely. I mean, considering when he started in 2000, it's only missed 2 years since 2001. He was a rookie, started at the same time as Alonso. I mean, it's worth noting that he was a rookie that absolutely took everybody by surprise. I was taking some notes before. I didn't realise that before he went into Formula One, he'd only had 23 starts in all forms of racing except for karting, which is quite a bit of an experience, but Michael Schumacher had respect for him, teams gave him a go, and he did quietly impress from the start. He may not have had as much success recently, but he cannot look back on the career that he's had with much concern or worry, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Tyson, we won't be able to use the phrase bois for much longer.
Wow. Yeah, he's had a very long, very illustrious career, World Drivers' Champion. I do think that this is the right time for it to happen because it's genuinely sad just seeing him, around the back in the Alpha. Hopefully, now knowing that it's going to be his last few races, it rejuvenates him and we see a little bit of the Kimi of old for the last few races, and that would be really nice to see.
Mm-hmm. And of course, this now opens up officially silly season in the F1 driver transfer market. We will, of course, keep you up to date how that is progressing throughout the next few weeks. So coming up, this weekend we have the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort. I think there's going to be a fair few fans there in orange. Hopefully they've managed to dry themselves out from Spa. Weekend after, we have the second of the sprint events. We're at Monza for the 12th of September. We then have a 2-week break before the Russian Grand Prix, and then we've had a fair few changes to the F1 calendar. So next up will be Turkey on the 10th of October, 2 weeks after that. 2 weeks after that, we have the final sprint event at Austin, Texas, the US Grand Prix on the 24th of October. 2 weeks after that, we're in Mexico for the 7th of October. Brazil on the 14th. I'm sorry, I will read that again. So Mexico is the 7th of November. So ignore what's on the screen there. That's my notes going wrong there. Brazil on the 14th of November. So a South American doubleheader there. We have got a race at TBC on the 21st of November. We are expecting Qatar to be confirmed. We are just awaiting official confirmation from Formula One and the FIA. Before the final doubleheader in Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi. Obviously, any changes to the calendar, keep an eye out on Formula1.com, the FIA, and of course, we'll let you know on each race event. So, final thoughts, guys. Yes, it was a very disappointing race in terms of weekend in terms of the race. But it was clearly the right decision in terms of safety, Tyson.
Yeah, absolutely the right choice in terms of safety. And dare I say it, Friday morning we were all like, it's going to rain, it's going to be great. Well, just be careful what you wish for. It was disappointing, but yeah, I think it was absolutely right in terms of safety because look at what the alternative could be.
It could have been far much worse, absolutely. And Hodders, F1 has said they're going to look at this. They're going to try and avoid this sort of situation happening again.
Yeah, they need to look at I mean, again, it has to be borne in mind, this is the first time that this whole thing has had to be activated, so it's a learning experience. I think in life in general, when anything goes wrong, you learn from it and you try and hope the learning actually improves things. Hopefully this is the case as well.
Absolutely. And of course, we have got a fantastic weekend to look forward to this weekend. We're back at Zandvoort for the first time in a long while. It's Max's Grand Prix, his home Grand Prix. Hodders, this is going to be a fantastic atmosphere.
It really is going to be a fantastic atmosphere. And on a lighter note, and I mentioned it at the time on Sunday, so far as I last checked, the weather looks absolutely glorious. And a fine trip to the beach as well afterwards.
Absolutely.
It's dry, and that's what
Oh,
matters.
absolutely, that's what we want. And we saw the reaction of the the Dutch fans at the two races in Austria we've had this year. So the Dutch fans at Belgium weekend just gone. Tyson, can you imagine the response if Max actually wins on Sunday?
It's going to be an amazing atmosphere. The Orange Army is going to be out in full force cheering Max on, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and equally, if you're Lewis Hamilton, take cover, I think. But equally, though, they're partial to a bit of orange, so I think Lando and Daniel Ricciardo may get a bit of support as well. We will wait and see. Guys, thanks as always for your contributions. We had to work hard to actually find some bits and pieces to talk about, but I think we found quite a lot to talk about, which is always good. Last, of course, our thanks to you, the listener. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to leave us a comment. We will be back next week to discuss and dissect the Dutch Grand Prix. From all of us here, be good, and if you can't be good, be safe. Take care, and goodbye.